This is the Pro Wrestling Illustrated podcast. I'm your host, PWI senior writer Al Castle, back once again with my co-host Brian Solomon. How's it going?
Happy to be here on video this time.
Yeah, look at us on video. We're like moving into the 21st century. And that is thanks in large part to our other guest, Candace, Cordelia. She's joining us because today we're going to be talking about the women's 150 issue. How's it going, Candace?
It's going great. I have my coffee. It's bright and sunny. I'm ready to go.
I was up until probably 3 a.m, like doing election stuff for my day job. So
yes,
forgive me if I accidentally confuse one of the women in the top 50 for one of the congressional candidates in Philadelphia or something like that.
I was just going to say real quick, Al, I tweeted about this, but last night I was doing wrestling stuff. I was writing something and I had the election stuff on in the other room. They were talking about the battle for Pennsylvania. And I thought they said the battle for WrestleMania.
And which is going to be in Pennsylvania.
Right. And I'm like, all right, I'm writing too much about wrestling. I got to stop.
So as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about the women's 150 issue. I've got it in front of me. For once, my mailman did not deliver it crumbled up. I think this is pretty much mint, which I sincerely appreciate it. And we'll get plugs out of the way real quick and then dive into the issue. Head over to PWI-online.com and pick it up. You could download a digital version right away or subscribe, have it mailed to your doorstep, or just order the one issue. Obviously, subscribing is the way to go. You could save half off the cover price. A fantastic issue. It's not just the women's 150 it's in here, but tons of coverage. A lot of women's coverage. We're going to be talking about some of that, kind of the state of women's wrestling, and the staff did a fantastic job of talking about that promotion by promotion, sort of the state of women's wrestling. And then again, the women's 150 ranking, which has really become a 10-pole issue, a staple. It started as the female 50, right? I mean, I think it's been now probably could be close to 15 years or something like that since we've started ranking the is it? Yeah. Since we started ranking the women, grew to 100, now up to 150. And I think right up there now with the PWI 500 in terms of prestige and eyes on this issue. So you don't want to miss it. We're in ranking season. I'm very deep now into the tag team. What is now the tag team 100? That's grown too. And of course, you could still pick up the PWI 500 in its 32nd year. So, magazine's always great. The rankings issue, I think, are particularly fun. A little bit of nostalgia thrown in. We've been doing it for so long. Even folks who just pick up PWI once or twice a year, go and get this one. It is destination issue. Don't miss yours. Go over to PWI-online.com. So, Candace, we're going to talk about it rather than really kind of belabor it and go one by one. These days, I'm sure people, if they want to find out, they could go ahead and find out who is on the list. From the cover, you know that Stardom is well represented in this list. I'm going to go through the top 10 real quick, and then we'll kind of dive in and talk further. So we start at number 10 with Taya Valkyrie from largely from Impact, but she is very, very busy, wears a lot of hats, a lot of promotions. Number 9, Starlight Kid from Stardom. Charlotte Flair is at number 8. She's probably in the top 10 as much as anybody in her career. Saya Kamitani, another Stardom competitor, at number 7. Jordan Grace from Impact at number 6. Jade Cargill from AEW, the TBS champion, at number 5. Becky Lynch, a former number 1, is number 4 this year. Thunder Rosa, the AEW women's champion, last I checked, is number 3. Bianca Belair, maybe some people are surprised to see her in this spot, at number 2. And number 1 this year, the first time we've got Stardom in a number 1 spot. Syuri, let's talk a little bit about her, Candace. I remember when we made Okada number 1 in the PWI 500, and certainly those who were familiar with Okada knew Okada. I think largely didn't take issue with it, but then there was a whole contingency of maybe more casual fans who never heard of Okada. I got to think that that's the case with a lot of readers with Syuri as well. For people who aren't familiar with her, what can you tell us about Syuri and why is she the right person to be number 1?
Well, I have to admit that when we were compiling the list and we were coming together, I, for myself, didn't know a lot about Stardom as some of our other contributors. So I was plugging for Bianca to be number one. I was definitely, and I had back and forths and emails, and I wanted to understand exactly why Syuri was number one versus Bianca, who obviously she had a banner year. And not knowing too much about Syuri's past and her experience, I was definitely schooled. And I was told all of the different parameters as to why she should be number one. And I'm still learning. I'm still definitely learning more about Syuri. I'm still learning more about Stardom. But after seeing the different graphs that I received and reading more about her and seeing more of what she's done, at least on social media, seeing some of her matches, it's quite spectacular. And I can't deny that she is deserving of the number one spot for all of the accomplishments, even barring her age, to be in this industry. And I'm, even looking at, I have the copy of the issue right in front of me, and 13, I didn't even know she was 13 years pro until, we were going through the list and really doing the rankings. And just to see what she's accomplished in such that certain parameter of time is amazing. I know that there was some controversy, especially on Twitter when the list came out, and people were thinking, well, why isn't Bianca Belair number one again? And I think that has to also do with the fact that more people, especially in America, still don't know a lot about Stardom. You really have to take the time to be proactive and look into other promotions besides WWE, AEW, MLW, etc. So the best thing that I saw when this list came out is that people on social media were like, okay, so this woman, Syuri, she's number one. I may not be too familiar with her. Maybe it's time for me to go find out what exactly is happening. And then there were also a legion of other people, which I love, that were really praising the fact that we put Syuri at number one. I don't know if it's due to the fact that they were all encompassing and familiar with Syuri herself, which it seemed as though that was the case, but there was a lot of praise for it, which really excited me. And it made me think, okay, international wrestling, more people are getting into it. More people are trying to figure out what's happening overseas. And a lot more people, just like you stated, Al, in terms of Okada. I think I saw that when it happened with Syuri, in terms of people saying to themselves, that's great. That's a great choice. I get it. I understand. And if I don't get it, I'm going to figure out exactly what is Syuri's case, why she's number one. I'm going to watch more of her matches. And I just saw that snowball effect, which was awesome. So you're always going to have detractors, but I think this was a way of bringing people together still, regardless of controversy or not. That's always going to happen. But I like the fact that people are trying to be more knowledgeable, including myself, of just wrestlers overseas, especially when it comes to Stardom, which is just, continuing to come on the rise. And they had their first show. They had their show here recently in New York City. And a lot of people were really into it and loved it and couldn't stop talking about it. And I think that our list, showing that Stardom is a force, is helping that wave, is bringing on new fans and really bringing people to understand and love who Syuri and a lot of these other women on the roster at Stardom are.
Yeah, I had to get up to speed. Also, you're doing a better job of it because you can pronounce her name better than I do. I keep on saying Syuri. It's Syuri, which is Syuri. I have to remember that. But I get to write the top 10 for this list, and I make no bones about it. I'm not familiar with as familiar with some of these women as others. I know about Syuri a little bit from working on this list in the past, but it's one of the hardest parts of the job, and also one of the most rewarding parts of the job is discovering some of this stuff. So you got to do like the deep dive. And I find myself watching a ton of Stardom, more than I do the rest of the year. And when you do, I think what you're touching on is you get it. And you're like, oh yeah, like this woman's incredible. And I'll go over just some of what we have as her top 5 moments of the evaluation period. She finally won what is Stardom's a top title in December of last year in a no time limit bout, beating Utami Hayashishita, defended against Momo Watanabe in July. And I'm not, she's been a prolific champion over at in Stardom. One of the things as a UFC fan that I dig about her is that she is legit. She is a former MMA fighter, actually a UFC fighter, and a former kickboxer, and she's got a winning record in both. So I mentioned in her write-up put gender aside, people who know wrestling, many of them consider her the very best wrestler in the world. She's that good. If you're not familiar with her, go and seek her out. Brian, I don't know how up to speed you are in Stardom. It's something that was just kind of gaining some traction a few years ago, and I think certainly over the last year has kind of cemented its place as the destination for quality women's wrestling. There have always been some of these promotions that have kind of tried to get a foothold on that women's audience to varying degrees of success, whether you talk about Shimmer or some others. Stardom really has kind of taken it to another level where one of the things that I think it's interesting, and maybe this goes for women's wrestling as a whole, is that for better or for worse, there's always been kind of different standards for women's wrestling. There's something that is good for a women's match, and I think Stardom is really one of the big reasons that those separations are, going away. And when you watch a great Stardom match or a great Stardom wrestler like Syuri, you don't need to qualify it at all. It's just incredible wrestling.
Yeah, there's a lot more of a global awareness, I think, in wrestling today, probably because of social media and the internet and everything. Like I've like Candace was saying, I've had to learn a lot recently, and actually since I've started doing the wrestling news, because we try to cover global stuff, that's where I've been learning a lot about Stardom more than I ever knew. It reminds me a little bit, and it just shows you how much more global wrestling's gotten and the awareness in the US or North America. Back in the 80s, people used to say that All Japan Women's was the best wrestling promotion in the world. And people in America had no idea who they were. You had to be like the Dave Meltzers of the world to have that awareness. And, they would talk about Dump Matsumoto and the Crush Gals and Bull Nakano, and people being like, okay, these are the best wrestlers on the planet. And most people outside Japan have no idea this is even happening. And I feel like that's what's happening now, except now it's a much more interconnected wrestling fandom. Now, there's still a long way to go, obviously, in terms of the awareness here. And I think it's a bold move, and it reflects the effort for PWI to be more global. Like for me, I've been in the position of being a managing editor of a wrestling magazine and torturing myself over sell-through numbers and who's going to do well on the cover and all that. So it always makes me nervous, going like, oh, I hope people know who they are. I hope they're known enough by the readers and everything. So, but I think it's a very brave thing to do, because hopefully, like Candace said too, it encourages people to learn more instead of going, oh, I have no idea who this person is, so therefore they're not important, and why did they put this person, at the top or near the top. The response should be like, okay, PWI is a respected publication. They know what they're doing. If they're putting these, Stardom wrestlers in the top 10, I need to know who they are, and I need to know what's going on, and that's something that I think is a positive step for an American wrestling magazine like Pro Wrestling Illustrated, because even men's and women's Japanese wrestling, even if you go back to the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, you had New Japan Wrestling, All Japan. They were putting on some of the best matches in the world. They had some of the best wrestlers in the world, but there was a fear to give it too much coverage, not just in PWI, but in American wrestling magazines in general, because there was the fear that readers wouldn't be aware enough of who they are. And I'm glad that things are changing a little bit, and it's much more of a global perspective now.
Yeah, I really agree. And I get the temptation of writing something off as illegitimate because you're not familiar with it. I mean, I know I've had conversations over the years with family, with friends about like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And, you see the nominees every year, and you haven't heard of half them. So they can't possibly belong in the Hall of Fame because I haven't heard of them. Where's Motley Crue? You can make the argument, sort of like the Big Daddy argument that we had a couple of weeks ago about the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame. It's like that there is a place for a Big Daddy, there is a place for a Motley Crue, but also don't just dismiss these folks that maybe you haven't heard of, because people who know this know that they really are something special. Candace, what is the secret sauce in Stardom, right? I mean, they have stumbled on some kind of a formula here of wrestling excellence. And again, maybe for people aren't as familiar, what is Stardom doing that other wrestling promotions are not?
Just based on the matches that I've seen so far, there's, and this might be a cliche term to use for this, but it really is a magical experience. I can only imagine what it's like being there live, seeing matches at Stardom, but watching the showmanship of it all, watching how the storytelling is just so well crafted. You can tell that they're really into the characters, the story, weaving things into this soap opera that if you look back on it 5 years, 10 years, 12 years from now, you can pinpoint the exact moments that certain things happened, certain people turned heel or face or what have you. And just the craft of the athleticism, which I think, in my opinion, because I love Japanese culture. I always have. It's the number one place that I want to go to, Japan, at some point in my life. I'm hoping in the next few years. But I've always had a reverence for Japanese culture because you can tell that, especially when it comes to fashion, art, sports, just everything that is woven into the culture. They take things seriously, and they really are very much into the intricacy and revering the art form of things. And I see that in the wrestling in Japan, especially in Stardom. And you can see it in the gear that they wear, just the set design. Everything is just so well crafted, so well done. And just like you said earlier, I mean, we have women in this country and all other countries that go to Japan. They go to Stardom. They go to other promotions in Japan to fine tune their wrestling skills, their in-ring skills, their promo skills. That's the number one place that a lot of women and men, all people, they go to Japan in order to hone their skills so that when they come back to their home country, they're better for it. And I think that Stardom has that special sauce just in everything that they do. And I'm sure, I don't know the exact secret. I feel like I would have to go to Stardom and talk to everyone and just get interviews.
Yeah, go join the dojo.
Right? I would love to, because they're doing something right. You see it in just everyone that goes through that system. You can tell that once they get through that system for however long or short of a time, they're just better. There's just something about what they're doing that just makes people better. And I think that's why Stardom especially has so many fans they love everyone that comes through the system. They love the characters. They love Syuri. They love everyone. And it's phenomenal to see. It really is. And I just love what they're doing. I love what they're doing. So now I'm thinking I need to go to Stardom and just
let's go field trip
interviews. Like let's do it. Yeah.
Make it a business trip. Maybe
let's all expense 3 flights to
there you go.
Tokyo. Kevin would love that. One thing you mentioned there, I really agree. And again, kind of when you're coming into this cold and you don't know the players or the characters, and you hear a Pro Wrestling Illustrated or a Dave Meltzer or somebody raving about it, I think some of the temptation is like, they're just kind of going crazy for the acrobatics and the flips and all that stuff. And something you touched on that absolutely I think is on another level there, and it is why I have grown to have such a respect for Stardom, is the storytelling. And it's maybe one of the more challenging things for American fans to follow because of the language barrier, obviously. But this isn't throwing 2 women in the ring and letting them all get their stuff in, right? It is layered storytelling. It is told over months and years. A lot of subtleties, a lot of nuances, a lot of themes about friendship and betrayal and belonging. It is really well crafted, really deep, very kind of cerebral. If you haven't seen it, go out of your way. There's stuff on YouTube. In some cases you may have to get past a language barrier. One of the things that I found is cool is that a lot of American fans have created videos explaining a lot of this stuff. So it's not just watching a Stardom match or some compilation, but watch reviews essentially from fans, and they'll walk you through it, and it's been super helpful. So yeah, can't say enough good things. Let's talk about the number 2. You mentioned Candace, and I think there can be a lot of people expect her to be at number 1. She was our number 1 last year, Bianca Belair, and you could make an argument she had a better year this year than last. Last year, her championship reign getting derailed at SummerSlam with the return of Becky Lynch. This time, once again, she wins the title at WrestleMania. Once again, steals the show, has the best match over WrestleMania weekend. This time, beats Becky Lynch at SummerSlam. Really kind of cements herself as the top woman in the company. But only number two. I say only number two, as if that's anything bad. Brian, let me go to you. What's your take on the year that Bianca Belair has had, and has she? I certainly think she has risen and proven herself to be among the very elite wrestlers in the sport, and still very young in her career.
Yeah, and I also think that she's benefited, and rightfully so. She's one of the top people that have benefited from the regime change in WWE. I think that's got to be said, because we talk about these NXT products and people that Triple H was very high on and really believed in, some of them not getting treated as well as they could have been creatively when they went to the main roster. And I'm not saying that, she was far from buried, but certainly what happened last year and the thing with Becky and all that had a lot of people scratching their heads. And I would have bet good money that one of the people scratching his head was Triple H. So I feel like he's been trying to fix that and really position her in more of a way that she deserves to be positioned, because you could even look at, yes, she's had a great year, but the second half of it has been even noticeably better than the first half, in where, ever since the whole damage control thing started, and, her feud with Bayley and now the War Game stuff leading into into Survivor Series, I feel like she's really been showcased in a way that's deserved. Because I remember, look, I know people like to say, well, I knew it way back then, but when I first saw her I think it was in the Mae Young Classic, maybe, when I first saw her in the first one, I was just like, there were a couple of people in there where I was like, this person's going to be a huge deal. And she was one of them. If you don't believe me, you could ask my wife. I said it to her back then. I said, this person is going to be a very big star. And so I'm not surprised, but you could just tell. And so I think it's great that she's getting showcased in the way that she deserves to be.
Yeah, and I think one thing that really kind of broke in her favor this year, and look, you never wish for anybody to be injured, but it was certainly fortuitous that Becky left, right, and gave her this breathing room. So that match at SummerSlam, I think, really helped elevate Bianca, both because she got the win, and kind of, again, contrast that against SummerSlam last year. And Becky put her over not just by losing to her, but gave her the endorsement, gave her, the handshake. Becky essentially turns babyface at the end of that match. But more importantly, she went away. And it's tough. It's tough kind of solidifying yourself as the one of or the top woman in the company when you're sharing the screen with one of the biggest female stars in the history of wrestling in Becky Lynch. So I think she needs some time to kind of go it alone. The flip side of that, I think, is that there is a noticeable kind of dearth of depth in the women's division, where it really just is Bianca now. Bayley's back, and Damage Control, is growing in their influence. It's a good act, but I don't see that long line of you still have Ronda Rousey in the company, but I think Ronda's slowed down considerably just in terms of the momentum she had. Candace, Brian mentioned the regime change. What's kind of the state of wrestling in WWE with Paul Levesque, Triple H running the show? The state of women's wrestling, that is.
Oh man, it's exciting, and I love that you mentioned, Brian, the Mae Young Classic, because I agree with you. I just want to put that in there in terms of Bianca Belair. And Rhea Ripley. I remember those two just stood out to me from the get. And I knew that they would be a part of the future of WWE and women's wrestling. And in terms of women's wrestling in WWE, it's an exciting time. This whole year has been weird, for lack of a better term, because I'm thinking, looking back, how much has actually happened in wrestling this year, and thinking about all the different changes, all of the crazy news, all of the exciting news. And since Triple H has taken over in this role that he has, this creative role, I just see so many awesome things from NXT to Raw to SmackDown. I mean, even looking at NXT, I'm so excited because we have girls like Roxanne Perez, Nikita Lyons, Lash Legend. I mean, just at Cora Jade, just seeing what they're doing in such a short period of time since they've gotten to NXT. It's extraordinary. I can't wait to see exactly where they go on the main roster, which could be any day now at this rate because they're improving so rapidly. And then you look at Raw and SmackDown, and there's always going to be storylines that we just don't understand. There's always going to be matches that we might have us scratching our heads at the final result. But all in all, when it comes to the women's wrestling in that promotion, I mean, when we have women like Bianca Belair, Becky Lynch, Bayley is back, we have Damage Control, Charlotte whenever she comes back, Sasha and Naomi whenever they come back, which is just going to, I think people are just going to lose their minds when that time comes. There's just so much promise, and we're seeing things change for the better. I could just tell in how people are in the ring, like there just seems to be a relief of tension. There's something different that you can tell. It looks like people just feel as though they have more creative control. You can see it in their actions, what they're saying in the promos. And it's so cool. And we look at other women like Liv Morgan, Alexa Bliss. There's so much promise to be had. And I'm really excited for them. And I'm happy that they can get into this new chapter for their careers in this new regime.
Yeah, it does feel kind of like a rebuilding year because you think about that WrestleMania event from a few years ago, the first women's WrestleMania main event. You had Becky, Charlotte, and Ronda Rousey, and Becky's out. Charlotte is out, and Ronda Rousey is around, but in a different role. And I think fair to say maybe not meeting the expectations that were there for her. She's not exactly setting the world on fire. As you mentioned, Sasha's no longer around. Maybe she's coming back. Bayley just returned after being on hiatus for a long time. So it's a different scene. And then you've got people like Liv Morgan who have become real players who were certainly in much lesser roles years ago. Brian, what's your sense of Triple H, Paul Levesque's vision for women's wrestling, and how is it different than Vince McMahon's?
Oh boy. Wow. I mean, night and day. I think one of the differences is that, Vince McMahon, for as innovative as he was and as groundbreaking and the way that he looked at wrestling differently from anyone else. I mean, he even called it something differently from anyone else. He's the only person that calls it that. But that aside, he became set in his ways. I think we all know that. And one of the things was he was, I think, still in the mindset of what women's wrestling in the United States used to be. And anytime we saw it deviate from that and to become something better, I think he was being like coerced and kind of persuaded to do it. I don't think his heart was in it. He still remembered the days when women's wrestling was, quite frankly, a sideshow. It was treated as a sideshow. It was an oddity. It was, oh my God, wow, they have women wrestling too? Oh, that's weird. I got to see that. I want to see. And there was something kind of, it was exploitative. Like, oh, we were going to see these hot women roll around on the mat. That was the thinking behind a lot of women's wrestling. Oh, it's a cat fight. Oh, wow, they're pulling hair. That was still, even when he would promote people like Wendy Richter or an Alundra Blaze, it was still like, it was just a tiny little part of the roster. You would typically have the champion and the challenger, like we've talked about, and that would be it. That was the whole division. Wendy Richter was going to be the female Hulk Hogan, but there was never this idea that women's wrestling was going to be on a par with men or even close to it. And so over the years, when it's gotten really hot and it's gotten over really strong, like if you go back to the Trish Stratus and Lita era or what Chyna was doing, and then even in more recent years, there was always the sense of like, okay, well, that's great, but we've got to keep it in its place. Like, hold on, we can't get too carried away with this. And I think that Triple H has none of those hangups. I think I don't know why. I mean, whatever. I don't know what led him to think that way, but he's got a very different view, and it was shown in the way that he managed NXT. Just the fact that, as we all know, I mean, the 4 horsewomen thing, I mean, they were like the most buzzworthy thing going on in NXT in the early years of it. And so now he's carrying that thinking over into the main roster. We see it all the time. that he's very much taking it more seriously, looking towards creating stars. I mean, we see it regularly now. I mean, I remember when Lita and Trish Stratus main evented Monday Night Raw in a steel cage match, and it was like, oh my God, it was huge news, as it should have been. But now women main eventing a show happens all the time. It's become like a somewhat regular occurrence, which again is a great thing. It's a great thing that we don't even bother to mention it anymore.
Yeah, the novelty wore off.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just expected. I think it happened even just last week. I forget. Well, we saw on NXT with the NXT Women's Tag Team title last night, but it's happened other times. And it's just expected now, like you said. That's a great thing. But it is part of the sea change that's going on is more of that, which is great.
Yeah, I mean, not to be too much of an armchair psychiatrist or anything like that, but you could certainly deduce that Triple H has a healthier respect, a healthier view of women than Vince McMahon did. And part of it, just from kind of observing Triple H's life and career in wrestling, is that he has been surrounded by powerful women, right? Whether it was his relationship with China 20-something years ago, marrying Stephanie McMahon, who's more of an ambitious, powerful woman than Stephanie McMahon, and then running the developmental system NXT for a number of years and seeing women come in, very green, and seeing that they have every bit of the hunger and determination as their male counterparts too. So I've never sensed with Triple H, and look, you go back to the DX stuff, and I guess maybe it won't look so good, but there's not as much of a track record, I think, as an observer of objectifying women as maybe Vince McMahon did.
Also, people grow and mature and change,
Sure.
and I think he definitely has in that regard, in a way that maybe Vince McMahon never did. He just never grew up in that area of thinking,
Yeah. Candace, I want to talk about that other company, AEW. They've got the number 3 spot in the magazine with Thunder Rosa. But I think it's fair to say not a great year for women's wrestling in AEW in the top 10. They've got 2 wrestlers ranked in the top 10. Stardom's got 3, WWE's got 3. And so you've got Thunder Rosa and you've got Jade Cargill. And for all the praise that AEW gets, and rightfully so, this is the one place where you tend to see more criticism. Brian, you talk about women being in the main event. You don't see that nearly as much, I think, in AEW, certainly not on a pay-per-view or anything like that. And the Thunder Rosa experiment, I don't think has been a huge success, right? So what can you talk about? What can you say about a Thunder Rosa's year? Maybe some stumbles along the way, and kind of the state of wrestling in AEW, women's wrestling in AEW.
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, it's there's so much to talk about this because it is quite frustrating. And for the most part, one of the main arguments that we hear is AEW is still a youngish company at this point. But it's at a point now where there just isn't an excuse anymore, to be quite honest, because as you stated, if we're looking at companies like WWE and even seeing what they're doing with NXT, which is considered their developmental, the main events that the women are putting on in that company just for developmental are spectacular. And we're seeing a steady rise if we're going to compare that to what we're seeing with AEW, where it's become a running joke at this time where you see people stating, well, let's see if they even have a second match for Dynamite for the woman, because we are always expecting that they're going to at least have one and perhaps a promo for the woman. But there's way more matches when it comes to the men in that company when we're looking at a Dynamite each Wednesday. Rampage is a little bit better. There seems to be a little bit more of a spotlight for women, especially.
That's almost worse because it's the B show, right? So it's sort of like acknowledging that they belong on the B show. Yeah.
Right. And so it's hard. It's really hard because everyone wants to see the women's division in that company get more opportunity. I can't sit here and state that the talent that they have isn't great, because they have great talent. They have talent that's still forming and developing, and then they have talent like Thunder Rosa, Serena Deeb. I mean, they have the pieces to the puzzle. It's just a matter of giving them more opportunity to shine. And when you have a Dynamite, which is only 2 hours, versus a Raw, which is 3 hours, and you're thinking, oh, we're just going to see one women's match and hope that it can be the main event match and hope that we can see like some meat to these storylines, which is another thing that I think now people really want to see, myself included, the more richness with the storylines. We want more explanations, because to be quite honest, not everyone is watching AEW Dark. Not everyone's watching AEW Dark Elevation. So we have to still see why a certain match is being profiled on the show, why we have to care about this storyline. What is the storyline? Because it can't just be seeing it play out on Twitter. It can't just be seeing it played out on social media. We need to see why this is important. And it really sucks because it can be done so much better. They have wonderful women on that roster, and the women want to work. They're rallying with each other. They want everyone to have more opportunity. And, you know, if we're looking at someone like Thunder Rosa, who started off the year with a bang, you know, getting the title, being that champion, being that face for the company and having that opportunity, and to see it kind of devolve to where it is now. And that's not a knock on Toni Storm at all. I love Toni Storm. But if we're trying to even figure out, you know, is there an interim? Why is this interim happening? For people to question, is Thunder Rosa still the champion? That's a problem. There needs to be a definition of what exactly is going on with the titles and what we're seeing for it to make sense, and for people to not just be invested, but stay invested. And I think that's the danger zone we're in now, where people are figuring out if they want to even continue watching, because if we're not seeing the woman getting the spotlight, more spotlight than they deserve, it's hard. It's going to be hard for people to stay invested and stick with it. At least with that division. So there's so much to unpack with that.
Yeah, and there's so clearly kind of, and it's measurable, a less enthusiasm for the women's division than anything else in AEW. When the women come into the ring for a match, crowd dies down a lot. You see it in viewership. Viewership falls down a lot. And it becomes kind of a self-fulfilling thing, where I think because there's not a lot of excitement, maybe they pull back, they don't invest as much. You don't sense as much faith in the women's division. You know, this reminds me of one of the social media debates that's been going on between Eric Bischoff and Tony Khan about, you touched on it, putting these matches out there cold. And Tony got very defensive. And I understand where Tony's coming from. Not every match needs to have this you know, developed storyline behind it, but it does feel like disproportionately that's the case with the women, that they're put out there cold more often. And you know, what's sort of maddening is that we've seen them do it well in Britt Baker, who was great, right? I mean, she checked all the boxes. She was one of the best things when she came on TV. I mean, she was a blast to watch. The character, the promos, the storylines, all that. And it just feels like after that, they took such a step back. And now, you know, another kind of common criticism is that they maybe do seem to be falling into that trap a little bit of, oh, you used to work for WWE, and getting excited about it. And so we've seen it with Saraya and the former Ember Moon and some others, just kind of bringing them over because they've got that WWE pedigree, even if, you know, there's a question about how good a fit that they are. Brian, I'll ask you, I mean, what's AEW doing right? Are we maybe being too hard on them about their women's division? And what are they doing wrong?
I just think it's part of the bigger problem that they're having now. Like, I do understand where Tony Khan's coming from when he's responding to Bischoff there, because I agree. And I think this whole idea of like every single match having this like carefully thought out storyline, everything. Look, that is an Attitude Era idea. For good or bad, that's like a Vince Russo thing. That was a Bischoff thing. That's what they did. And the shows became very busy, and everybody, I mean, I have actually seen some of the like creative meeting notes that Vince Russo would put together for some of these things. And more power to those guys for doing that. But that's not the only way to do it. Not every and in fact, I'm not even such a huge fan of that. I think it's a bit too much when every single match needs to have a story. Every wrestler needs to always have a program. I think it makes for a very busy show. But that also doesn't mean that your booking just should be lazy and chaotic and lackluster. And I'll be honest and say that that's a lot of what I've been seeing in AEW. I went to, especially the live experience, I went to Rampage at Mohegan Sun here in Connecticut, and even without the benefit of the announcers walking you through it, like you have Tony Schiavone, you have Jim Ross, you have Excalibur, you have people with Taz who are good at what they do, and they could fill in the gaps and make up for things and cover for things. It is a chaotic experience. So who is this guy? What's happening? Where are the what happened? Why do these people not like each other? Like it's not as well thought out as what WWE does. And I think part of it, especially with relating to the women and how they're featured on the roster, is I didn't think this at first, but watching the product now for a few years, AEW, and thinking about it in reference to WWE and everything, I think that part of it is that Tony Khan really, okay, I never thought I'd be saying this, but Triple H, I think, is a more forward-thinking, innovative wrestling mind. Like, he's a fan, and he loved his 80s wrestling, and he was one of the top wrestlers in the 90s and all that, but he's not as much caught up in the past as I think Tony Khan is. I think Tony Khan, as a booker, he's a fan, he's got that 80s, 90s wrestling, the stuff that he loved, even early 2000, and he's stuck in a way. And part of that, the downside of that, is that was the era, like we talked about, where there wasn't a lot of thought put into women's wrestling and how to present it. It was truly an afterthought. It was something to fill out the card. And so I think maybe whether it's conscious or not, that is what is seeping into the AEW booking philosophy. Because look, you could say the Thunder Rosa experiment isn't working, or some people aren't being perceived the way they should be, and the matches, the fans tune out and all that. But I think that's a result of training. You have to train your audience. You have to condition your audience, and you have to, it's all about the booking and how they're presented. I think the disinterest is a reflection of the lack of confidence that AEW has in their women's division, not the other way around. So I think that's something that they're way behind WWE on, obviously.
Yeah. And they've definitely taken a step back. Again, I go, think to that Britt Baker Thunder Rosa match, which I think was our match of the year last year. And it was a terrific match, all the emotion in it. And I remember interviewing Britt sometime around there and talking about, a rematch of Britt and Thunder Rosa in the main event of a pay-per-view seems inevitable, right? Like, it was one of the hottest matches that they had to pull out. And you fast forward a year or so, and it's hard to think that we were ever even there. I mean, it just feels like the women in AEW, and I don't want to exaggerate. It's not that they're an afterthought. That they have their segments, they have their storylines, they get mic time, but there's such a clear gulf between a John Moxley, an MJF, their storylines, where they're positioned on the show, and the Thunder Rosa, a Tony Storm, the top women in AEW. I'll mention Jade Cargill real quick, who is our number 5. I think she's something special. Still a little green and should be. I mean, I think she's only been wrestling for a couple of years. Our Rookie of the Year last year, but they really seem to have something super special in her. Talking about Vince McMahon again, he would have got crazy for a Jade Cargill.
Yes.
Right, Candace?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about some of the other promotions represented. As I mentioned, WWE's got 3 spots in the top 10. Stardom's got 3 spots in the top 10. The others are occupied by AEW's got 2, and Impact actually probably has a pretty good showing. I think they do better on this list than most of our other lists, and that's been kind of the reputation for Impact for a long time. Brian, you talk about kind of where WWE was with its women's wrestling presentation years ago. In a lot of ways, Impact, the former TNA, were pioneers of taking women's wrestling seriously. when you talk about people like Gail Kim and Awesome Kong and the presentation they got in TNA when WWE was still doing lingerie pillow fights. And over the years, there have been some forks in the road. But when you talk about Jordynne Grace and you talk about Taya Valkyrie, two of the best women's wrestlers in the world, two very different wrestlers from each other, and also different than most of the women on this list. These aren't cookie cutters, and that's one of the cool things about the Knockouts division is that they are all shapes and sizes and looks and styles. And frankly, I think a lot of it doesn't work. I see some of this stuff and it's like, it's not for me. Some of it can feel pretty indie-rific, but it's cool that historically Impact has taken some chances with its women where other companies haven't. I mean, they put the world title on a woman a couple of years ago.
Right.
So, Candace, what can you say about where Impact is with its Knockouts division?
I've always liked, or rather loved, the Knockouts division. I think those that are in the know, they're in the know. They are well aware that Impact has something and has always had something really special with the Knockouts division. And we have talents like Jordynne Grace, Deonna Purrazzo, Taya Valkyrie, Masha Slamovich, the list goes on. The work rate that those women put in and day out. And it's, I know there are people out there that say they don't watch Impact, which is fine. Not everyone does, but I think that they're missing out because their Knockouts division is truly fantastic. It really is something to behold. And everyone has put in so much hard work. I mean, when you look at the pay-per-views and get to that point, and you see how the storylines from what we're seeing on weekly television are infused into the pay-per-views, how they definitely add more layers to it. And it's seen in their in-ring skills. It's awesome. It's really awesome. And I love Jordynne Grace. I really do. Sometimes I forget how young she is, but she seems to me like an old soul because she definitely, when you see the output that she has as a wrestler and what she's done in her career, and to note her age and to know that it's only up from here. She can only go up, and whether that continues to be an Impact or if she makes her way to WWE or AEW, it's going to be phenomenal to see what that range of matches that she can have with certain folks in, say, for WWE, if that were the case, if that were to happen. It makes me really excited. But in terms of what she's done at Impact and what a lot of those other women have done at Impact, it really should be praised. And I sometimes, when I hear people downing Impact, it makes me upset because I'm like, I don't get to watch it every week myself, but when I do, I never have a bad time watching it. It really is entertaining. And a lot of the matches that I really love do come from the Knockouts division. They really do. So I hope that more people can watch them and really see what they're doing because it's great. What they're doing is really great.
The challenge that Impact has, and we talk about it here sometimes, I think is just from a production level standpoint, and just the reality that they don't have particularly deep pockets. And, you tune in to Impact on any given week, and especially you've been watching for a long time and you compare it to what Impact looked like 10, 12, 15 years ago, it's night and day. I mean, it's almost like one of these, local independents where they get like a handheld camcorder and they upload it. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not a lot. I mean, it is low production value, not the most major league looking product in the world. So, for a casual fan, I get sort of like you tune in and you say, this is, Bush League. And it's a shame because, that belies some real talent in the ring and also some quality storytelling. There's a lot to like on Impact, but they're up against just the reality of not having the resources that some of the other companies do. Anyhow, I won't go through the whole 150, certainly, but you certainly should. Head on over to pwi-online.com and check out the whole list. Well, we got a little more time here, and I'm hoping to be able to talk a little Logan Paul and maybe even some more AEW, but didn't want to miss a big story in the NWA. Brian and I sometimes to talk about the NWA, and Candace, you're certainly welcome to chime in. But Nick Aldis departing. They've got a pay-per-view coming up, I think this Sunday, the Hard Times 3, and a very public falling out between Nick Aldis and Billy Corgan, the owner of NWA. Nick Aldis telling the world that he has given his notice. It seems like he was intent on finishing up his time at the NWA, being on the show. But Billy kind of, fires back and suspends him, takes him off the show. Brian, what's your take on this, and how big a deal is it for the NWA to lose Nick Aldis, and how much potentially of a coup is it for WWE or AEW or anybody else that this guy's on the free market?
It's a very big deal because it just gives you an idea of what the chaos that's going on over there. Because I mean, he was their biggest name. He was kind of like the face of the NWA ever in the Corgan era. Not only that, but as we know, he was very involved behind the scenes. He had a producer role. He was really plugged in, and there seemed to be a great relationship in the beginning. So to see that deteriorate, I think, is very telling. I think, I think that company is in some trouble because, I mean, I used to be a big supporter, and I would talk a lot about the NWA when Corgan first took over, and when they started Power, there was such a buzz. I think it's just been a steady decline. Some of it has been the pandemic. That show really took a brutal hit when the pandemic hit, more than other shows did. And it's the steady loss of people who, whether or not the reasons for their dismissal were justified or not, or departure, the fact is that it creatively hurt the company every time. And product-wise, Cornette, Lagana, even David Marquez, who was involved behind the scenes and was their interviewer. Every time something like that happened, I felt personally like the product took a hit and got a little bit worse. And, especially in some cases, like, I'm not defending, like, let's say, the things that Dave Lagana was accused of and all that. I'm not. I'm just saying that it hurt their product, the bottom line. And now they're in a position where their top star is on the outs with the owner. And again, it's interesting because it goes back to the presentation of women's wrestling. That's an integral part of the falling out of Nick Aldis and Billy Corgan, because he was talking about how a lot of it stems from the way that Empower was handled, and the way he talked about Billy, disrespecting his wife, Mickie James, and her position as the executive producer on that show. And, I cannot defend the kind of thing that when you see Billy Corgan saying, oh, I don't know if there's enough women of quality to carry a pay-per-view. I can't imagine what it feels, who are available to us. I can't imagine what it feels like as one of those women talent, hearing him say that. And this is also a man who, and look, I'm the one saying this. This is a man who is putting Tyrus in multiple consecutive main event world title matches. And he's saying, oh, I don't know if there's enough high caliber NWA level women's wrestlers out there to carry a show. So a lot of that has been something that Nick and Mickie have been quietly dealing with, not wanting to make a public thing out of, and now it's coming to a head. I have also heard through the grapevine, through my sources, and I can't reveal specifically, that there is a female talent now within the NWA who has also given her notice. I don't want to say who, but for similar reasons, for the frustration over how women are being presented. And it's not just that. It's because Nick has said this too. It's in some of the comments he's made that got him in trouble. It's the whole creative direction of the company. Yeah. It's just, it's gone so downhill. It's just, I mean, you want to talk about chaos. I mean, it makes the AEW look like Mid-South Wrestling or something. It's like there's no cohesion. What they did on their last pay-per-view with Cardona and the title being held up and all that, it just made no sense. It was so frustrating. It was one of the sloppiest kinds of examples of booking I've seen on a pay-per-view of any company ever at the NWA anniversary show that they did in August. It's been kind of a mess. And so I sort of see where he's coming from, because he's a very put together talent. He's always taken care in how he presents himself. He looks and carries himself like one of the NWA champions of old. He's a great performer. A lot of people have said he was too good to be there, and now that seems to be coming to fruition, because any company would be smart to snatch him up. It's only a matter of where. I mean, I think he's got a great look, and he's a great talent, and he'd be a great fit in either company, honestly, meaning AEW or WWE.
And he's such a veteran, and I think he's maybe 35, something like that. I mean, this is
Younger.
a guy who
I think he's like early 30s.
Yeah, he still has plenty of mileage. So absolutely, I mean, a great pickup, and I hope, promoters out there realize what's available, because there aren't that many guys like that, or women like that. A free agent who can hit the ground running, who could be fresh for folks who are more casual fans, but also comes in there with a reputation, including a reputation as a world champion. So a huge pickup. A couple things that I want to respond to that. Largely agree. It's frustrating with Billy, and how it seems like he's kind of getting in his own way, that he had this thing that I think so many people really found kind of a charming, and had this great buzz, and he seems insistent on kind of moving away from the stuff that was working, and I go back to my hot seat interview with him, and I liked Billy a lot when we chatted, and again he taught me how to play the riff for Disarm, so that was cool. But I always think back to how unnecessarily defensive he got over the term throwback. The idea that the NWA was throwback, and not only did I not mean it disparagingly, it was a compliment, and it was working at the NWA. And that's not to say that you just create a nostalgia promotion, but clearly that was part of the formula that really worked. And if you are going to lose some of these guys along the way, whether it's a Jim Cornette or a Dave Marquez, or obviously Nick Aldis, and many others that kind of like dropped off over the last few years, it's like you better have something better in the pipeline, and they have it.
Right.
Is it Tyrus? I mean, it's the don't tell me that Tyrus is better than a Nick Aldis. And in lieu of that, and I think this is a lesson for all wrestling promotions, and you've seen it in history. People talk about, why was Hulk Hogan on top for so long in WWE? Because it was working, and there was no reason to change it. And that was the same for John Cena. And I might argue that they moved away from John Cena too quickly. So when they got that belt off of Nick Aldis, and I don't remember the particulars of it, whether he was hurt or something, but certainly he's been available and healthy, and kind of on the bench for the last year plus. And it's puzzling. It's like, this guy was such a great world champion for you. If you've got something better than that, that's fine. Right. But you don't. And it certainly isn't Trevor Murdoch.
No, and I felt that way when they first put it on Trevor. I just thought, that's not really your guy. I think he's great, but that's not your guy. And I understand what they were going for. They were going like, oh, well, he kind of looks like Harley Race a little bit if you squint your eyes or something. Like he has that vibe. But Nick Aldis was working so well, and he got bumped at the anniversary show in August. He got replaced by Tyrus.
Right.
He was supposed to be in that match, because again, he was making critical comments about the company publicly, and he got like bumped into a mid-card match, I think with Flip Gordon or something. Right. But he, what I want to clarify too from before about what I said is like, yeah, I mean, they've gotten rid of people, and I know they had their reasons with Cornette, and they certainly had their reasons with Dave, and I understand completely Dave Lagana. Marquez, I do not understand. I think that was a huge mistake. But what happens is every time, fine, if you have your reasons, but what replaces those people is always a step down every time. And no offense to the people that have stepped in, but it's always a step down. It's never an improvement or even something that's just as good. And they went from being something that was vintage, nostalgic, and cool to just, they started to become a parody of that. And I think that's when the trouble started, when I was watching going, okay, they went from being like, we're trying to recreate this 80s studio wrestling to now we're making fun of 80s studio wrestling. And I think when you do that, you alienated the original audience you had, and it's only gone downhill from there.
Yeah, it's frankly, it's not a good product right
No,
now.
no.
It's not a good viewing experience. And again, what's crazy is if you talk to Billy, it's like it sort of reminds me, and I know you're a horror guy, Brian, of people love The Shining, right? The movie, that is. Stephen King hates it, right? And it's like these people who, what they create that really works, there's almost like this detest for it, and trying to move away from it. And it's like, yeah, that first year or so of NWA Power was like his shining, and he'd rather have the guy from Wings on the ABC TV movie version of it.
It was my favorite show for a while, like every week, the
Yeah.
NWA. It was like, it was just so different and cool. It was the one I looked forward to the most. But yeah, I see what you're saying. Stephen King absolutely loves that really horrible TV movie version of The Shining they made with the guy from Wings in the 90s.
Right.
I don't get it. I think he's bitter because deep down he knows that Stanley Kubrick actually made his book better. That the Shining movie that he did is better than the Stephen King book, improved it, fixed things in the book. And I don't think as an author that he appreciated that very much.
And I wonder if there's some of that in the NWA, in that, when you talk about a lot of these guys, whether it's Logano or Nick Aldis, as you touched on, not just the talent, he was an employee. He was, and I had Nick here on the podcast years ago, what kind of in the early days of this version of the NWA. And he was a true believer. I mean, this is a guy who was all in, very much invested. And I wonder how much of Billy's problem is that he felt like, it was too much other people's vision and not his vision. And in some ways, the more it worked, the more he resented it because it wasn't his, right? So how much of it was Lagana, how much of it was Marquez, how much of it was Aldis? When you know what you know about those three guys in particular, you want to throw Cornette in there, and you think about the NWA when it was working at its best, it very much you feel all those guys in that product, right? I mean, like,
yes,
all those guys' fingerprints are all over that original NWA, and the more that it is Billy's vision, I don't know that it works so well.
Because look, he always wanted to run Impact. That was his thing. He was, and I think the NWA thing to him, I hate to say, was from the beginning like a compromise. I know like David Marquez was the person who suggested to him, like, hey, why don't you try buying the NWA? Like, they're a total disaster. I've been involved with them for years. Their management is in shambles. Why don't you come in and buy them? And he did, and took it over. But it's been from the beginning, I think he wanted it to be something different from the people that were working for him wanted it to be. And I know, look, the Cornette thing for me was the beginning of the end. Like when that happened, it was almost like, oh my God, what's going on over there? Because look, he shouldn't have said what he said on the air. Certainly, he should have known better. He was still in his wrestling heel manager mode where you would have said that in the 80s to get your guy over and make people hate you. I get it. He should have known better. They also should have known better than to even let it on the air. I mean, that was taped weeks in advance. We talked about that when it happened. And then the whole thing was mishandled where, they tried to get him to give an apology. And he basically said, look, this isn't even fun anymore. I'd rather just go back to my house, do my podcast and sell my action figures and not have to leave my house. And he got out. And that was like the beginning of the downturn where like the goodwill started to dissipate, I think, even from there.
Yeah, and obviously the pandemic accelerated all that because they were just off TV for a long time. And then the offerings that they were putting up during the pandemic, what was it? Like WrestleLand or something like that.
Really I blocked it out of my memory. I know.
Yeah. So they've never quite gotten back on track. Anyway, I mean, I hope they turn things around, and certainly wish the best for Nick Aldis. Candace, let me ask you one point on this, because the fallout with Nick Aldis reminds me of another big story in the last few months with CM Punk.
Mhm.
And, you know, how much latitude should wrestlers, and especially wrestlers sort of at the top, have to feel free to disparage their employer? Because that's one place where I am a little sympathetic towards Billy Corgan, as far as, is it a look, whether you got a problem with the product or not, we've got a show coming up in a few days. Is this really the right time for you to be crapping on our show? And I think to Punk, after winning the world title, sitting right next to Tony Khan and crapping on WWE, on AEW. So, you know, is there something just to be said for, like, you know, be a good employee, be a team player, and maybe handle some of this stuff behind the scenes and not in front of the whole world on social media?
That's such a huge question, because in 2022, we are now in a world where quiet quitting is a buzzword, right? And it's funny you asked me this, because I had a really...
Because we all think this about Kevin. We just can't talk about it.
Right. But I had this really great conversation with a friend about this notion just in general about work culture over the phone last night. And when it comes to wrestling, I think because it's such a public job, and it's something that not a lot of people, especially within the realm of entertainment and sports entertainment, are privy to unless you're actually working in that space. You always, when it's a relationship between employer and employee, there's a level of respect and trust across the board, and that's just beyond wrestling. But I feel as though when you get to that breaking point where you feel so frustrated, and given the environment that you in, I mean, if we're looking at the whole CM Punk situation, it just to me seemed like he was at that point, and we don't know unless we were there in those rooms with him and with the people that were with him working to know exactly how he was behind the scenes and what he tried to do in order to be a team player and to help others and so forth and so on. We'll never know, right? So at that point during that scrum, we just got the brash end of someone who just was done, frustrated, and was at the end of his rope. And I think when it's at that point, it's sad, because it should never get to that point. And I feel as though if you are a wrestler and you're so frustrated with your placement, and there comes a time where you have that opportunity that CM Punk had, where no one told him to say what he said, he just took the liberty of saying it because that's who he is. Other wrestlers wouldn't have done that, and that's just based on personality and just, I guess, how many years you've had in the business and so forth and so on. But I think there's a time and place for everything. However, I can't fault a wrestler for being frustrated about their station. I couldn't sit and tell someone, don't do that or don't say that, because everyone is different. And whether you feel it's moral or in his right to do what he did, or for, in the case of Nick Aldis, to say what he said on Twitter, I'd like to believe, and I always have, that everyone has a breaking point. Everyone can get to that point if they're pushed far enough. And it's really up to you to decide if you want to jump that ledge or if you want to stay back. And perhaps for a lot of people, they've tried behind the scenes to talk things out. You know, that could very well be the case with CM Punk and Nick Aldis. I would like to believe that they had those moments where they sat someone aside and said, hey, I'm not cool with what's happening. And if they feel as though they haven't been heard and that they haven't had that time to be given the grace to be in the room with those people who make those decisions and have them actually really hear them, not as the wrestler, not as CM Punk the wrestler, not as Nick Aldis the wrestler, but as the people that they are, the human beings, the employees. It just seems like they were fed up. And it's sad that for Nick Aldis, especially, that it got to that point. I mean, I was chuckling because I'm like, he quit, but then he was fired. And that's just, it's like, it's that age old, oh, you're going to quit, well, I'm going to fire you. And it just, at that point, it became a little bit foolish, because it seemed like the man he said what he said, he was done. And, you know, that was that. So it is frustrating to see things like that, because you want to believe that people are having a good time for the most part where they're working. But if they're not, it affects the product. And we're seeing that with NWA. Unfortunately, we're talking about Empower. I want to see an Empower 2. I watched the first one and I loved it. And since then, people have been asking for a second one. And we're just getting these responses of there's not enough competent women talent. That just, that blows my mind when we have a PWI Women's 150 and
there's 150 of them. Yeah.
Across the globe that there are competent women talent. I mean, we're at the point where we're thinking, should we have a PWI 200? Because there's not enough room and space to fit 150. It's like we need more. So it's just messy all across the board. It just seems messy. I'm just sad that it's come to this point. And I want better for everyone, you know, and us watching.
I think it's tricky, and you touch on a lot of important topics. Because on one hand, I get the idea of you got to be a team player here. You know, certainly that's what's inbred in people in WWE is, you know, whether you're on board or not with the creative. Publicly, you better be on board. And I think WWE wrestlers do toe the line. You don't see this kind of thing as much outside of WWE. The flip side of that is that at the end of the day, these guys, you know, wrestling is a business where wrestlers are typically independent contractors, and you got to look out for yourself. And if you've got a real problem with the product that you're associated with, I get wanting to be out there distancing yourself from it, saying, look, don't identify me with this. You know, I don't agree with what's happening here. But yeah, that makes you the bad employee. So certainly a lot of sides here.
Yeah.
In the last few minutes here before we run, I did want to touch on a crown jewel, not as a whole show, but want to talk a little about Logan Paul, who I just thought was magnificent. A lot of people surprised by Logan Paul. I gotta say, I wasn't. I thought this match was going to be great, and it was great. You know, I think Wade Barrett called him the best third match wrestler he's ever seen, and I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I can't think of another a wrestler, certainly a celebrity crossover wrestler, who is this poised, this graceful. He just everything the guy does is picture perfect, working on the absolute highest stage. This isn't Bad Bunny taking 3 bumps in a tag team match. This is working with Roman Reigns in a stadium in the main event, and he just couldn't have carried himself any better. So just blown away by Logan Paul. Brian, were you impressed by him as well?
Yeah, he's a natural, like people have said. I think that just based on crowd reactions and stuff, though, they might want to, you know, maybe not try to force him as a baby face. Like that's one thing I noticed. I think he just has natural heel kind of energy with the wrestling.
But he works a really effective baby face style. I don't know if
he does.
Of those moves he does work as well as a heel.
But what told me a lot was, you know, Roman Reigns is now in that area where he's the heel that people really want to like. He's in that like Ric Flair, Rock kind of territory where it's like he's this heel that's so dominant that people like him. And so they look for any excuse to start cheering him. And I think when you put him with Logan Paul, that was like the tipping point where I really feel like Roman Reigns is almost headed towards babyface territory if they keep doing that. But that aside, I think, yes, he's fantastic. And I think that they would probably do well to try to sort of get him to make more appearances. Although maybe it helps that he's a special attraction and maybe he won't get, you know, burnt out or stale or whatever, like a lot of wrestlers do. Maybe it's a good thing, but yeah, I think he's great. I know he tore his knee apart by doing that incredibly cool spot where he jumped off, you know, he flipped off with the cell phone onto Roman.
Right.
I feel like that might be the kind of thing where a wrestler who wasn't so new might have not done it. He might have said, whoa, this is stupid and crazy, and I'm going to be off house shows for like a month if I do this. But he didn't know any better, so he just went ahead and did it, and it was great to watch. I just hope he's okay. I hope his knee heals up well enough. But I feel like that's something that only he would have done. I think any other wrestler in that position would have been too cautious to do something like that.
But it's great seeing, you know, a celebrity crossover wrestler who is so invested, who is not holding his nose through it, who is throwing himself into it. I remember when I saw him at WrestleMania, the tag team match, and I thought, man, in a different lifetime, this guy would have been just terrific as a WWE wrestler, assuming that he would never seriously entertain, a contract with WWE, and sure enough, he did. He seems to be enjoying it. I'm thinking maybe a tag team match with him and his brother versus the Usos might be in the works. I wonder if that's somehow part of War Games. I don't know. Candace, on a related topic, just the bloodline. I don't, as much as we talk about Roman, I don't know that we've spoken enough here about just what a blast the bloodline is. You think about to that segment a couple weeks ago with Sami Zayn, was probably the most over guy in the entire bloodline, which is so crazy to think about. But that segment a few weeks ago where they lost the match, and then Daddy comes home, and everybody's kind of like on pins and needles because here comes Roman. And Sami and Jay are bickering, and Jay says, I don't give a damn what the tribal chief says. And everybody in the building and me at home goes, oh no, that's
right.
That's wrestling at its best.
Yeah.
I mean, they really have something magical in the bloodline. Do you agree, Candace?
Absolutely. And seeing Sami just run with this, and now everyone is saying Usi like wherever they go.
Yeah.
It's awesome. It's really great seeing the cohesion of that unit and how they're just having fun with it. And just like you stated, it's that storytelling, it's the storylines, and we're seeing how layer upon layer each week they're just rolling with it. They're loving it. And we are so invested. We cannot wait to see what happens week after week. And that's the whole point, right? And it's not always about what's happening in the ring. It's what's happening outside of it. But the bloodline as that unit, I mean, they're at the top of their game right now. It's so fun to watch. And me personally, for selfish reasons, because I love her, I have been voting for quite some time for Naomi to be
a great fit. Yeah.
When or if she comes back, I really just want her to come full on just as a part of the bloodline. Do things with Sasha if you must, but that would just be the creme de la creme of this whole thing, to have her come through and have interactions with Sami and Jay. And I would just love to see it. So I love them. They really have become entertaining.
You talk about, it being clear that they're having fun, and it really does make all the difference. I mean, if you ever watch like a good Saturday Night Live skit, the best ones are when they start cracking up, right? And they could barely kind of keep it together. And there was some of that in that skit. And, you could argue that maybe it took away from some of the seriousness of it. But I think more importantly, what does come through is that everybody here is really enjoying this. Everybody knows that they're doing something that is really, really great. Everybody is playing the role to perfection, whether it's Paul Heyman and the subtle differences in all the characters. Everybody, has got a different role. Paul Heyman as the wise man, Jimmy, a little more easygoing, a little more of a party guy, Solo Sikoa as the enforcer, kind of quiet and brooding. Jay is the hothead who's just sort of like constantly kind of pissed off and can't get along with anybody. And Sami happy to be there. And it's just, and the chemistry between the different players is so great. I love, and you wouldn't think this would work, but Sami in the bloodline and Roman, who is sort of like the ultimate bully and has no tolerance for anybody, having a soft spot for Sami, and he likes him. He's sort of like the pet, he gets a kick out of him. And that drives Jay crazy. It's just all great. What's crazy is that it's so much fun to watch, and there's not even really an angle or a storyline or a match that they're building to. It's just an act that shows up on TV, and it's a blast to watch.
But they got it over so well. That's the thing. Like when you said, when everybody flipped out, when Jay said what he said, that he didn't give a damn what the tribal chief said. I mean, that's when you know that an act is over, like that they're with you in that moment, that those thousands of people and everybody just, like that, they responded. And that is the result of very careful, week by week, building something up patiently. Like you said, even when there isn't a specific angle, the idea is when you get these characters over and their dynamics over so well, you can build things out of it, and you have a built-in audience. People are already like bought into it because they believe in these characters. Like the Sami thing, I don't even think, and look, it's been very well handled from the beginning of the bloodline. Like we've talked about, they've always kept it interesting and fresh and layered. But I think the Sammy thing, I think, was something they stumbled into. I don't know for a fact, but I just don't think that was the plan. I think it was intended as a one-off joke. Like you have, this goofy guy who is so out of place and mistakenly thinks that he is a member of the bloodline when he's really not. It almost seemed like this mid-card throwaway thing for a couple of weeks. And then all of a sudden, I think somebody was like, hey, this is working. We should actually have him join the bloodline. Like, I don't think that was the original plan, because that's what makes it work is he so obviously doesn't belong in the group.
You see all the
memes. Great.
Right. You see all the memes of like the Usos as kids, that you see these pictures all over the place, and Roman as a kid, and there's little Sammy as a kid with them as a member of the family, and it's just kind of silly, but it really, really works. Contrast all this to Roman Reigns 3 years ago, and I used to always say he looked like a guy, kind of going full circle to we were talking about Punk and Nick Aldis. He looked like a guy who hated coming to work every day, when he was positioned as a baby face that wasn't working, and he would come out there and everybody would boo him, and he had kind of the sad sack face. And again, contrast that to now, where he's great. He knows he's great. He's having a great time. Everybody, the Usos are great. They might just set the record for the longest tag team title reign coming up this week in a very high profile match with the New Day. All of it is clicking. It's exciting to see where this is going, and it's not really clear. We've got, we're starting to kind of get into where we're at least thinking about WrestleMania, and it's not clear where it's going. Other than, he delivered another rock bottom at with Logan Paul.
Right. And Rock has been saying things on interviews. There was that interview he gave for Black Adam. I don't know if it was planned or not, where they asked
I'm not convinced it's happening. Yeah.
Did you know what I'm talking about? Where they asked him like
the tribal chief,
and he was like, "You're looking at the tribal chief, right?"
Yeah,
now.
the head of the table. Yeah. I'm not convinced
table, right.
I'm not convinced it's happening. It still sounds like a lot of things have to line up for that to work. And now we're kind of getting there, right? I mean, you'd think this would be around the season where maybe they make it official. There's still time, but we will see. I worry in lieu of that. What is it? I mean, I gotta tell you, I don't want to see Roman Reigns and Bray Wyatt at WrestleMania. I hope that's not it.
Can I just say that I think I hate to be the one to say this, but like for me, Bray Wyatt in like record time has gone back to being as awful as he was when he left. And I hate to say that, because I first of all, I know not everyone's going to agree with me, and I know like people want him to succeed and do well, but I just feel like, oh my God,
it's the worst of Bray Wyatt.
Yeah, the thing they did with the backstage tech and like where he's harassing the guy, and then the whole like Uncle Howdy is me, and I'm going to wrestle me, and I swear I just had the instinct of like, wow, I really just want him to go away again. And, and it's only been 2 weeks.
And that's been Bray Wyatt for years. Yeah.
Candace looks like she disagrees, so I'll let her.
I'm curious. You don't want to see what happens between him and Alexa, because that's what I'm invested.
Oh God, keep Alexa miles away from that.
I will say my interest was piqued when they did the little thing where they showed the logo on screen, and because I always like when they do these callbacks and they acknowledge the history of the characters and their storylines and all that. Yes. But then I remember like what it actually was that they were doing with her and everything, which was another example of like, I almost felt like Alexa benefited when he left, even in her character that was related to him. I liked better after he was gone. When even though she's not doing that character anymore, maybe she'll go back to it. I don't know. I don't know what it is, but I just think like it's almost like the idea of Bray Wyatt is cooler than Bray Wyatt.
And you think about, this has been the pattern with Bray for a year, is that they build anticipation, they build, and then they deliver what his latest vision is. And when they actually pull the trigger on it and it's executed and you have it and it's in the ring, It's horrible. I mean, you remember that with the Fiend before the Fiend wrestled for the first time. It was a long, drawn out build for the Fiend, and then we got it, and pretty. I defy you to point out one good Fiend match. It was terrible television, and I thought the build to this latest, and we talked about it. This latest return of Bray Wyatt was masterfully done. It worked on the ratings. I mean, I think in the latest a quarterly investors call, there was a lot of celebrating about what a success it was for viewership and all that. Absolutely, it really worked. But now we have Bray Wyatt back, and this is what it is, and it's always this kind of too clever for its own good. I still think when you have a guy who is that creative, there is something to be done there, right? I mean, there's got to be a way to tap into that for the betterment of WWE. But he's got it. It goes beyond being reined in or being edited. I mean, it's too much. He's just like a walking fever dream, and it doesn't work. When you're trying to kind of tell cohesive storylines. I mean, the guy is changed the channel. Right
but
away.
He does. We have to say, and I'm even that he has his fans.
Yeah,
there are people who love what he does. There are people who are into the whole like, oh, what does this mean and what does that mean, and they're watching it in that looking for clues and things. There is that segment there. I don't know if it belongs in the main event though. I don't know.
And there might be more of them than of us. So I will absolutely acknowledge that. I mean, it's not that the guy doesn't have a following. There are people who right now were vehemently disagreeing with us, and think everything he does is great, and that's fine, but it's tough. Even if you like the guy, you have to acknowledge that it's tough to fit him into the rest of the product. He doesn't play well with others.
It's a new regime, so we'll see. I mean, I really like Bray Wyatt. I always have, and I'm just holding on to see what exactly comes of his character in this new regime and how they implement it, and who will come into the fold in his group to kind of solidify that. So I'm just holding on to see what they do. It's going to be the same of what we've seen, or a new chapter, or another new chapter rather. So
I guess there's news that Bo Dallas might be on his way back. Maybe he's part of the act. They've never had those two together, but
he acknowledged on TV for the first time ever that he was part of a prestigious wrestling family,
right.
That he's like third generation. He didn't say third generation, but he acknowledged that, and they've never even made mention of that before, that he was, part of the Rotundo Wyndham wrestling family.
Yeah. Anyhow, I know we're up against time here. I want to thank both of you guys. Candace, anything you want to plug? You still regular on Busted Open? When can people hear you there?
Yeah, I am working on the next appearance, but that should be forthcoming soon. In the meantime, Face Turn with Candace Cordelia. Check that out on YouTube. I have a full-on slate of new interviews coming soon there that are really exciting, so you don't want to miss it. And you can follow me on Twitter, Candace Cordelia, and also on Instagram, thatgirlcandace16. And just stay tuned. There's a lot coming up towards the end of 2022.
Yes, thank you so much, Candace. Brian, you've got your book, you've got your podcast, you got tons that you're doing. Where can people follow some what you're doing?
Well, there's the Shut Up and Wrestle podcast, which is suawpod.com. It's an old school themed wrestling podcast, and the wrestling news we've been doing now, which is you can get at thewrestlingnews.com. We do this thing every morning, and I am slaving away at this script every day, so people better be listening to that. The book, Blood and Fire, the unbelievable real life story of wrestling's original Sheik, right? Which I haven't shut up about for 3 years. It's still out there, print, digital, and audio. I have an announcement I'm going to make soon. I'm not going to make it now because it's not totally set yet. But for the next book, it is going to be a wrestling book, a biography. And I can't wait to tell people, because I think people are going to be super excited. Hopefully very, very soon, once ECW Press gets it all totally set up. I don't want to jinx anything. It's going to be really cool.
Great. Looking forward to hearing it. Guys, thank you so much. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Pick up the latest issue of PWI, the Women's 150, on newsstands or at pwi-online.com. That's all for now. We'll be back soon.